Tonight on Bridge City News, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau kicks two popular Liberal MPs to the curb. We will tell you who they are. Residents of Lethbridge East expressed their concerns with candidates at a political forum last night. And a great season came to an abrupt end as the Lethbridge Hurricanes lost in Game 7 to the Calgary Hitmen.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott have both been kicked out of the Liberal caucus. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement during an emergency meeting last night. Wilson-Raybould, whose allegations of political interference by the PMO appear to have deeply hurt the Liberal hopes of being re-elected this fall.
Civil wars within parties are incredibly damaging because they signal to Canadians that we care more about ourselves than we do about them. That's why I made the difficult decision to remove Ms. Wilson-Raybould and Dr. Philpott from the Liberal caucus. We've taken every effort to address their concerns. But ultimately, if they can't honestly say that they have confidence in this team, despite weeks of testimony, face-to-face conversations, and phone calls with myself and other members of caucus, then they cannot be part of this team.
Brian Lilly is an award-winning journalist in Toronto and a regular contributor to BCN. He's been following this story very closely. Brian, you take issue with Justin Trudeau blasting Jody Wilson-Raybould for recording a conversation with a former clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick.
The Prime Minister called it unconscionable that she would dare to actually record a phone call. Wait a minute. What about actually trying to subvert justice? What about trying to get a sweetheart deal for a company charged with bribery and corruption? Is that not unconscionable? Apparently not in the Liberal caucus these days. So, strangely, not a lot of pushback from the Liberal caucus on this. I would have expected more, but they all seem to be lining up behind the Prime Minister because they know that he is their ticket if they're going to win in the fall election, and that's looking less and less likely by the day.
Mr. Lilly will have much more to say on Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott being booted from caucus coming up after business news. The Alberta provincial election is just around the corner. It's coming up April 16th. Last night, residents of Lethbridge East came out to an all-candidates forum at the Lethbridge Public Library. As Naveen Day explains, there were times when things got a little heated.
How do you reconcile your own personal ethics with running for a party and for a leader that has been beset by scandal from the time it was formed, and how has a leader who is fairly reliably accused of successfully fixing his leadership campaign by running non-candidates? How do you do that, sir?
For myself, I have run everything straightforward, out in the open. I will answer that, I will stand before you, and I will tell you what I know. And I believe that Jason Kenney will make a good, strong leader for the United Conservative Party and for Alberta.
So many business owners, small business and medium-sized business owners I've interviewed on Bridge City News Television, have a real problem with that carbon tax. And they say that Rachel Notley didn't do very much about it. She went hand in hand with Justin Trudeau just over 2 years ago to implement that carbon tax. They say it's killing small businesses here in Alberta. So how do you respond to that, this carbon tax?
Well, I'm going to start by saying, first of all, climate change is real because it's a scientific fact. Since we implemented our climate leadership plan, which included the carbon levy, the emissions in Alberta have been reduced by 7 megatons.
Carbon tax has resulted in 183,000 lost jobs. Maybe all those people not driving to work has some difference in what the emissions level is.
We also spoke with candidates from both the Liberal Party, who want out-of-work Albertans back to a different job market, and the Alberta Independence Party, who plan to end the GST, equalization payments, and the carbon tax by seceding from Canada.
The Alberta Independence Party wants to take Alberta out of Confederation because we believe the entire political system in Canada needs to be fixed. And we're going to do this by holding a referendum within the first 60 days of our party coming into power.
We're calling for more accountability on where this pipeline's at. We need to know where it's at, when it's coming. We also need to diversify our economy, providing supports to get people that are out of work from the recession back into a different job market without breaking the bank while they're doing that.
The forum for Lethbridge West candidates will be held on Thursday, April 4th at 6:30 p.m. at the Downtown Public Library. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Also running in the Lethbridge East riding is Ali Taylor of the Alberta Party, and she joins me now from Calgary. Ali, share a little with our viewers of who you are.
Okay, well, born and raised in Winnipeg, moved to Calgary in 1988 with my family, and went to school here. I played pretty aggressive softball growing up as a kid, and eventually got a scholarship to go to university in North Dakota, went there, and then came back and continued my education in journalism, finished and graduated my journalism degree, worked in the industry for a while, and then got into finance and business. And along the way, I've kept up with a lot of community involvement, community service, especially in the city of Airdrie, in which I moved to, on the city council, on the budget advisory committee, as well as helping in Calgary with the Calgary Immigrant Women's Association as a board member for operations with them.
One of your promises is to double the number of educational assistants in classrooms. Why is this a priority?
Well, I think that it's really quite a strong priority to make sure that the children are set up for success in the future as they continue to be educated with, while we may not today be able to reduce the classroom sizes, we can at least increase at this current time the ratio of teachers to students. And so by doing so, providing a more one-on-one basis learning for children.
The Alberta Party would like to introduce Digital ID. It's one provincial picture identification card for all government services. Your thoughts?
I like it. I think that it's, to me, it makes sense. It's, other places have put this in place already, I believe. And to me, I think that it's a good move in the right technical direction. And it's nice to keep up with the technical world and not get left behind. So looking forward and happy with the sense of urgency the Alberta Party has put in place in the technological growth of the economy in the world.
Many people say that this election really is a two-horse race between Rachel Notley and the NDP versus Jason Kenney and the UCP. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I say do your research. Make sure that you know come election day what it is that means the most to you personally, how a party can impact you, your neighbors, your city, your province. And I think that if you take a close, good look, the Alberta Party can sufficiently achieve both ends of the spectrum. And that's why I'm here. And I think that there's no better time than right now to find the happy medium between the two parties.
Ali Taylor, Lethbridge East candidate for the Alberta Party. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thank you, Al. Appreciate it. Take care.
The Lethbridge Hurricanes cleaned out their locker rooms earlier today after being ousted from the playoffs last night at Nicholas Sharon Arena. The Canes lost 4-2 to the Calgary Hitmen, who will advance to the second round of the playoffs. Ainsley O'Reilly says the hockey season may be over for some players, but for others, it's just the beginning.
Going into the playoffs, the Lethbridge Hurricanes had won 10 straight. They beat the Hitmen in 5 of 6 matchups in the regular season and finished the year with 12 more points overall. As the story goes, playoffs are a different animal.
Yeah, like this year, we obviously made some big moves and wanted to make a long run, and things didn't go as we wanted to, but we learned a lot, and we learned what it takes to win in playoffs, and there was just such a great group of guys we had this year, and we all wish we could have gone longer. Today's
locker room cleanout brought up some reflection.
It goes by in a blink of an eye, and I'm really sad to see it's over. It's you make a big commitment when you're 15 years old to come to the Western Hockey League, and for it to be done already, it kind of seems like yesterday my parents were dropping me off in Regina.
The Canes arguably sported the best offense in franchise history, with a handful of players signing NHL contracts. One thing's for sure, the training and hockey preparation will not end this summer.
Yeah, everyone's going to do their separate things. Some guys are going up to the A, and I think I'm going to be going to Sweden. So it's definitely something different. It's cool and another chance to represent my country. So I'm happy about that.
I'm gonna go join the Hartford Wolfpack, play a couple games there, see what happens, and then hard work in the summer. Get in the gym, start training. That's my #1 goal. And just enjoy it.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
The World Men's Curling Championships continue at the NMAX Centre in Lethbridge. Canada's Kevin Cooey opened the tournament with 6 wins in a row. He feels his team is ready to take on the contenders over the tough second half of round-robin play.
We're where we need to be, and I think we'll continue to get better, which is, I always say, that's the key to these events.
I know you're not that huge on all the percentages you were talking about the other day, how those don't mean that much in the big picture, but there have been some really good ones lately. BJ's had a couple of really good games.
Yeah, he's played awesome. Got us out of trouble there a couple ends, and just he's been like that all year. So we're all going to need to be like that as we kind of get into the more of the favorites here. But I like where we're going. I like the way we're throwing out there. I think we're improving, and there wasn't many throws out there today that were missed out of our hand. They were all thrown well.
Good luck going out to the Cooey foursome. Police in Coaldale were called out to a 2-vehicle accident on Highway 512 around 6:30 p.m. last night. A black Mitsubishi SUV was headed eastbound when it collided with a white Ford F-350 at Range Road 205. The driver of the small SUV was taken to Chinook Hospital with serious injuries. His passenger also received minor injuries, while the driver of the Ford truck was uninjured. The highway was blocked for about 4 hours during the investigation. If you witnessed the accident, please call Coaldale RCMP at 403-329-5080. A 49-year-old Lethbridge man has been charged with drug offenses after police seized carfentanil, crack cocaine, and methamphetamines on Tuesday night. Police responded to a call about an impaired driver at a North Side pub. When they arrived, they busted the guy who was wanted on an outstanding warrant for assault. Mark Anthony Brown faces a wide range of charges and is remanded in custody. Residents in Varsity Village will experience a water outage tomorrow. City employees were out handing out door hangers warning about the water outage, which is thanks to water system repairs. The planned shutdown will be for about 9 hours. A clean drinking water supply will be available from a trailer that will be parked in the neighborhood. E-Free Church in Lethbridge is hosting their 3rd annual blood drive. The group teamed up with Canadian Blood Services to help give the gift of life.
This year, the dates for our blood donation drive is April 1st to 13th. Our goal is to get 50 people to donate in that time. We have them, Canadian Blood Services, come out to our church and book appointments and do blood tests and those sort of things. But we also do, people take blocks of time and just fill it with people. So we get new appointments, we try to get some new donors in that time, and just get reoccurring donors to donate. If they haven't donated for a while, to donate during this time, and if they have donated, to continue donating and try to put their appointments in this time so we could reach our goal.
The blood drive continues until April 13th at Canadian Blood Services. The goal is to have at least 50 people donate blood. South of the border, U.S. President Donald Trump is pushing NATO countries to increase their financial contributions to the Western Alliance. He also praised member nations for their efforts so far.
We're looking at the 2% of GDP level, and at some point I think it's going to have to go higher than that. I think probably it should be higher, but we're at a level of 7 out of the 28. The United States pays for a very big share of NATO, a disproportionate share. But the relationship with NATO has been very good. The relationship with the Secretary General has been outstanding. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Many Canadians are concerned about how much of a presence Chinese telecommunications company Huawei has in our country. Is there a threat to our national security? Christian Leupprecht is a security expert and a professor at the Royal Military College of Canada, and he says we need to be careful just how much access we grant Huawei.
It is important for us to be aware that China is playing aggressively in this arena. And so this is why the conversation about Huawei is just one part of a much broader conversation that we ultimately need to have in Canada about what sort of activities are we prepared to tolerate and what sort of vulnerabilities are we prepared to have, and to what extent do we want to safeguard around this type of leverage, exploitation, and potential vulnerabilities.
Catch my full interview with Mr. Leupprecht discussing Canada's biggest security issues coming up in the second half of our show. Another nice spring day in the city. The rest of the week is also looking mighty fine. Complete weather details are coming up. We had sun mixed with cloud today and hit double-digit temperatures once again. Tonight, just a few clouds with a low near 6. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with a high near 18. Cooling off slightly to 16 degrees on Friday. A beautiful weekend is shaping up. Sunshine and 15 for Saturday, sunny and 16 for Sunday. Monday, some clouds will return and we should see a high near 13. Cooler on Tuesday with a high near 11 degrees. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 10 and an average low of -3. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1944 at 23 degrees, and the record low was -19 in 1972. Sunrise was at 7:05, sunset at 8:04. Looking at tomorrow's national temperatures now, Victoria will be partly cloudy and 14. Chance of showers and 14 as well for Vancouver. Mainly sunny and 14 for Calgary on Thursday. Rain and only 3 is expected in Edmonton. Clearing and 15 for Regina. Mainly sunny and 12 for Saskatoon. Winnipeg will have snow mixed with rain and a high of 3. Just a few clouds and 5 degrees for Toronto tomorrow. Ottawa will be mainly sunny and 2 degrees. Montreal will also have lots of blue sky and +2. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have light snow and +1. Rain for Halifax, Nova Scotia and a high of 4 on Thursday. A chance of flurries and 2 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect drizzle and a high near 3 degrees for tomorrow. A third Canadian canola exporter has received a non-compliance notice from China because of quality concerns. Federal Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bibeau would not name the company as she testified before a parliamentary committee studying the trade dispute. She says the notice does not mean that the trade with the company has been suspended. China sent similar notifications to Richardson International and Viterra. Chinese officials also suspended their licenses. China's moves have been widely viewed as a play applying pressure on Canada after the December arrest of a senior Huawei executive at the request of the United States. The head of Richardson International says finding new markets for Canadian canola will not be a painless exercise if the ban on Canadian canola drags on. Kurt Vossen made the comment to a parliamentary committee studying the trade dispute. He said he cannot emphasize enough finding a solution to the feud, and quickly. The Winnipeg-based company has been doing business with China for more than 100 years. Facebook user data is apparently showing up in places it should not. A cybersecurity firm called Researchers at UpGuard says user information was inadvertently posted publicly on Amazon.com's cloud computing servers. This comes a year after the Cambridge Analytica scandal exposed how unsecure Facebook users' information is online. The database was closed earlier today after Bloomberg alerted Facebook to the problem, and Facebook then contacted Amazon. Facebook shares pared their gains after the Bloomberg News report. Clothing retailer Roots topped expectations during the fourth quarter with a profit of $18.3 million. The Toronto-based company says total sales were $130.8 million compared with $130 million a year earlier. Roots says sales were up 3.1%, while comparable store sales also amounted to about 3.1%. On an adjusted basis, Roots says it earned 53 cents per share. That was down from 59 cents in the same quarter in 2017. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott have both been kicked out of the Liberal caucus. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement during an emergency meeting last night. The fallout continues from Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott being booted from the Liberal caucus. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here is your Bridge City News community calendar. Misty Creek Dog Rescue is holding an adopt-a-thon on Saturday, April 6th from 12 to 3 p.m. Come to Homes Alive South and meet some of the friendliest dogs and puppies that are available for adoption. For more information, visit mistycreekdogrescue.com. Come out for an entertaining evening as Father Leonard Van Tighem Performing Arts presents an original musical production called Cursed Through Time on April 10th and 11th at the University of Lethbridge Theatre. Enjoy a charming and magical tale of friendship, family, and the dreaded middle school experience. Doors open at 6:30 p.m. and the show starts at 7. Tickets are $10 for adults, $8 for students, and are available at the door or can be purchased at the school office. For more information, visit holyspirit.ab.ca/FLVT. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott are back in the news for big reasons. Joining me now to talk about it is one of our Toronto contributors, Brian Lilly. Brian, they're both out. Tell me more about that. What happened?
Yeah, they are gone. Dramatic moments on Tuesday, late Tuesday afternoon in Ottawa. The Liberal caucus held a meeting. Now, the Prime Minister, get this, the Prime Minister scheduled to speak in Toronto at a big fundraising event at 8:30 at night. 8:30 at night. It takes about an hour to fly to Toronto. It takes him about half an hour to get to the airport. And yet, just before 6 p.m. on Friday night, he's holding court at a Liberal caucus meeting to announce that Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott are out. Jody Wilson-Raybould actually tweeting this out at 5:44 p.m. Now, why is that of significance? Because the Liberal caucus meeting to decide her future was scheduled for 5:45. So before the caucus meeting even began, the Prime Minister had made the decision. Both of these women are out. Part of the reason why, the recorded phone call that we'll get to in a moment of Jody Wilson-Raybould speaking to the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick. The Prime Minister called it unconscionable that she would dare to actually record a phone call. Wait a minute. What about actually trying to subvert justice? What about trying to get a sweetheart deal for a company charged with bribery and corruption? Is that not unconscionable? Apparently not in the Liberal caucus these days. So, strangely, not a lot of pushback from the Liberal caucus on this. I would have expected more, but they all seem to be lining up behind the Prime Minister because they know that he is their ticket if they're going to win in the fall election. And that's looking less and less likely by the day.
Brian, many Canadians are talking about that very phone conversation you were just discussing between Jody Wilson-Raybould and the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick. What did that phone call really tell us?
Well, it's about 17 minutes in length, and I believe somebody counted it was 17 times that he tried to get her to change her mind on giving a sweetheart deal to SNC-11. Look, this construction giant out of Quebec is facing charges of corruption and bribery. The allegations are they bribed Libyan officials to the tune of $48 million to get government contracts, including buying a yacht for the son of Muammar Gaddafi, that horrible dictator who was behind the Lockerbie bombing, taking down a jet plane that killed Canadians, that killed people from around the world and put a Pan Am airliner in a field in Scotland. A man that suppressed his own people, that killed his own people who were political dissidents. Those are the people that SNC-Lavalin was dealing with and offering bribes. They took him on a cross-Canada tour filled with prostitutes. I mean, they were paying huge sums that I don't understand how. This is not my forte, but I still look at they kept receipts. They kept it as a business expense, and you look at it and you say, what? That's what this company was doing. $48 million they spent on Libyan officials. The other allegation is they defrauded Libyan organizations of $138 million. And this is the company that we're trying to save. So Michael Wernick tried 17 times in a 17-minute phone conversation to try and get Jody Wilson-Raybould to say, no, we're going to give them a sweetheart deal. She had looked at what her director of public prosecutions had determined and said, I'm good with this. I'll stand with this. This is how the law reads. I'll stand with the rule of law. They were trying for political considerations because they feared the loss of votes in Quebec to try and get a sweetheart deal. She said no, so she got fired.
So, Brian, Jody Wilson-Raybould, Jane Philpott punted from caucus. The news comes as the written testimony of Jerry Butts was released. Brian, we saw the context of the emails and text messages. What did they tell us?
It was bizarre to me that Gerald Butts would want to release these. I don't know what Jerry was thinking, because he actually said in his letter, so he sent a letter to the committee, and then he sent about 39 pages of text messages and handwritten notes, and then transcripts of the handwritten notes because his writing's so bad, they had to actually have them typewritten so that people like you and I could read them. He said in his letter to the committee that this backs up what I said. Now, I asked several people, am I reading this, through a partisan lens? Am I reading this through rose-colored glasses? Am I just seeing what I want? And even people that weren't on board with my view on the SNC-Lavalin scandal said, no, I think you're reading it correctly. Jerry Butts' testimony and his written notes back up Jody Wilson-Raybould, not him. The Liberal supporters, the backers that are sticking with the Prime Minister say, well, his notes never mention SNC-Lavalin. Okay, well, those are notes and text messages from someone who, as we see in the Mark Norman trial of Vice Admiral Mark Norman, they were scrupulous in not keeping notes. Well, he was very vague in most of his notes. And then when he was detailed, it backs up Jody Wilson-Raybould. She said in a phone call, I'm being shuffled out for other reasons. I don't want this. You are punishing me. Things like that. That backs up her testimony, not his. Hal, every day it seems like the Liberals come up with a new idea on how to make things worse for themselves on this. They have kept this scandal alive as much as anybody else, as much as the reporting by the media, pressure by the opposition. It's as if they wake up in the morning and they have a conference call and they say, wow, yesterday was really bad. And then somebody says, hold my beer, I'm going in. And then they just make it even worse.
Brian, the carbon tax has been here in Alberta for just over 2 years now. We've had to deal with higher gas prices, heating costs for our homes and businesses. Well, now the carbon tax officially took effect April 1st in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, New Brunswick, and many in those provinces are not happy about it.
Yeah, well, here in Ontario, pretty much every member of the PC caucus, that's the governing Ford Progressive Conservatives, was out on Sunday taking photos or videos of themselves pumping their gas and saying, make sure you fill up before the carbon tax kicks in on Monday. It went from, depending on where you live, $1.15, $1.17 to, well, about 4 to 5 cents higher. And once you add in the GST, it's about a 5 cent per liter hike. Some people mock this and they say, well, that doesn't amount to anything. If you have to fill up your tank several times a week, Hal, adding $4 to $5 to a fill up, that starts to hurt. That starts to be an annoyance. And the strange thing is that the rebate that you get, because I've been through the forms, and it differs whether you live in Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or New Brunswick. They try to come up with averages for how much you drive, how much it costs to heat your home, and so on, and then give you the rebate based on that. It's very unlikely that the government claim that you will get back more than you pay actually pans out. If you're a downtown dweller that does not drive, that takes public transit everywhere, that doesn't have to drive kids to hockey practice, ballet practice, skating lessons, soccer practice, any of these, if you don't have to do that, you're probably fine. If you rent a car once a month, or you rarely drive like my grandparents, I remember my grandparents would drive to groceries on Friday, church on Sunday, and the car stayed parked the rest of the week. Those folks are doing fine. Everybody else is going to pay more.
And you have to pay more as well for heating your home. I just got my recent gas bill. It was $22 in carbon tax alone, and the GST on top of the tax, taxing the tax.
Well, here in Ontario, Enbridge is talking about an 11% hike just on your home heating bill. That's significant. I mean, think about this. How many times have you heard politicians denounce cable companies or phone companies or cell phone companies because of a huge increase? And then they all run out and they denounce it and they say, this is horrible. There ought to be a law. We should do something. We're going to clamp down on them. Well, wait a minute. You guys just pushed this up. Not the company. You did. And they're all out defending it. I have to say, in the case of Catherine McKenna, the environment minister, quite badly. She was asked about tax breaks and benefits for small businesses that are really going to be hurt in a radio interview. And I literally heard her say, due to this, people will be able to go out and buy things at Canadian Tire. I have no idea what that meant. I have no idea why she said it, but those were her talking points.
And the Trudeau government began an ad campaign to get more Canadians into buying into this carbon tax.
Yeah, you know, this is a wide-ranging ad campaign. For the last week, 2 weeks, I have been hearing about it nonstop. Make sure you get your climate action incentive. That's what they're calling it. Okay, good Orwellian newspeak. Climate action incentive. There are radio ads. I got something in the mailbox. It was sent to every home in the 4 provinces I listed where this carbon tax has come into play, and they're going to be showing TV ads soon. There will be ads ahead of movies. There will be ads in newspapers. It's going to be great for the media. So it's great for you and I, Hal, is not great for people. I mean, they're spending so much to tell us about it. I wonder how they're going to be able to make us all rich, because that's the promise, right? You'll be richer than what you pay. I don't think that's true, because they never include the indirect cost. They never include the cost of the head of lettuce going up, or your kids' jeans going up, or your jeans going up, or that nice tie you're wearing costing you more. None of that's going to be included in this. So there's a lot of wiggle room here. There's a lot of weasel words going on. It's unfortunate that that's the way things are, but that's the reality right now when it comes to the carbon tax.
So what's the status on the 2 court cases against the carbon tax, one involving Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe and the other Doug Ford in Ontario?
So the Saskatchewan case was heard earlier this year. I believe it was around the end of January that they had their court hearing dates. I've been hearing from people that we could hear within the next week what the result will be. But at this point, I don't have a date yet. So I'm not willing to say. Maybe, you know, if we're going to find out next week, then we would likely hear by Friday what day the court would release its decision. If not, then it'll just be put off into the future. It's always a guessing game with trying to figure out when court decisions will come up. But Saskatchewan's had its day in court. They had very solid arguments on the constitutionality of this, the fact that this was not a tax under the general taxing powers of the federal government, that applying it to certain provinces but not others violated the spirit of federalism. Many other good arguments. Ontario's court case will go before the Ontario Superior Court in about 2 weeks. So we could have a decision from Saskatchewan by then. If Saskatchewan wins, the feds will appeal. If Saskatchewan loses, I'm sure they will appeal. Now, Ontario backed Saskatchewan's case. They were interveners. In the Ontario case, which they also have their own solid arguments that are very different from Saskatchewan's, those will come out. I believe the court dates are April 14th and 15th. And then Saskatchewan will act as an intervener in that case. So this is going to be going on for quite a while. So in addition to all the troubles that Justin Trudeau has with SNC-Lavalin, he's got to fight with 4 provinces. And as the Conservatives have been pointing out, look, Rachel Notley of the NDP is not exactly a fan of Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax. So if she wins, which is a long shot in the Alberta election, she's not on board with what he's doing. If Jason Kenney and the United Conservative Party win, he's going to get rid of the carbon tax and join the fight. And Wade McLaughlin, who's the Liberal Premier of Prince Edward Island, he's not on board with it either. So they've actually got 6 out of 10 provinces against this now.
Wow. The canola clash with China continues, another big issue here for a lot of prairie farmers. Now, the feds are considering sending a delegation to China, and there will be special hearings before a parliamentary committee. Tell me more about that.
So the parliamentary committee is going to hear from Marie-Claude Bibeau. She is the agriculture minister, newly appointed in the most recent cabinet shuffle. And Justin Trudeau's had a lot since January, again, all related to SNC-Lavalin. But she's taken over the agriculture file. She's not overly familiar with the canola issue. She's not overly familiar with the issues of Western farmers. Now, I have to say, most canola in Canada is grown in the prairie provinces, but there's a significant amount in Ontario, especially Northern Ontario. It's not really a crop in Quebec, where she's from. So this is new. She's got a steep learning curve. Jim Carr, international trade minister, he's from Manitoba, Winnipeg area riding. He's got a bit better handle on this issue. They're going to be appearing before the committee. As I've told you before, Hal, China is always a little bit protectionist on this because they have an inferior product. They're still using rapeseed, which is what canola came from, but we figured out how to make it taste better, genetically modified. So they're always trying to protect their own farmers. But this attack on Viterra, on Richardson, on other exporters, this is nothing but an attempt to use trade wars to settle the scores on Huawei and the arrest of their Huawei CFO, Meng Wanzhou. So there's a lot of high-level politics in this. Unfortunately, Justin Trudeau has blown his political capital with China a long time ago, and I'm not sure that this high-level delegation to China will work. I'm not sure we're going to get an awful lot out of the agriculture minister. Hopefully, Jim Carr will give us a bit more.
We've discussed the new trade deal between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico many times, or the USMCA. Brian, it appears as though the new deal may be held up, but this time not by Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's going to be the Democrats, which is actually not a surprise because the Democrats are not as trade-friendly towards Canada as Republicans. And I know that surprises an awful lot of Canadians when I talk to people about this, but Republicans are normally much more trade-friendly. Democrats are much more protectionist. Donald Trump kind of turned that on its ear, and all of a sudden you had Democrats cheerleading for a new NAFTA that they've always hated just because Trump wasn't for it. Anyway, so we got a new deal, but now Nancy Pelosi, who is the House Speaker for the Democrats, she's saying until Mexico reforms its labor laws, we are not going to ratify this deal. So that could slow things up for Canada. Now, if you remember back, part of the deal, especially around autos, was that, well, Mexico had to raise its wages because the big complaint from both Canadian and American manufacturers, whether it be autos or anything else, is that Mexico pays very low wages. So they're frustrated with this. They say, we can't have a level playing field if you're paying $2 an hour down there and we've got to pay $16 to $30 an hour. So they came to an agreement. They came up with something. Mexico would lift up its wages. They would change their labor laws. That hasn't happened yet as per the deal. And Pelosi says until it does, no ratification. So could be another delay. We'll see. This has been a very dramatic thing. We've had a lot of delays, a lot of snags along the way, and then eventually things sort themselves out. But if it happens this time that things are delayed, it won't be Donald Trump. It will be Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats.
Tony Clement says he will not be running in the upcoming federal election. Brian, he admitted his shortcomings and is looking for a path back.
Yeah, of course, Tony Clement, longtime provincial politician in Ontario who became a federal MP in 2005. I've been covering Tony Clement since about 2002, and very accomplished parliamentarian, very accomplished guy. He was on the National Security Committee of all parliamentarians. This was a multi-party committee. It covered the House of Commons and the Senate. And of course, he had that scandal surrounding inappropriate images on Instagram, attempts to basically blackmail him over those images. He thought he was discussing things with women that were not his wife. He says he's been spending the last several months focusing on his family and getting back to that. He said it was an easy decision. He said it wasn't a difficult decision to leave politics at all, that he spent the last several months focusing on what matters and that he wants to keep doing that. He, as you said, he acknowledges shortcomings. He's asking for forgiveness. He is thanking people for their prayers. So, you know, hopefully Tony Clement, a man that had an awful lot of respect on all sides of Parliament, let's hope that he does get back to the right path on this.
Yeah, we wish him all the best, Tony Clement. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.
Cybersecurity is becoming more and more of a need in today's quickly changing world. Today's guest recently wrote an article published in the National Post entitled, "Why Banning Huawei is Just One of a Series of Steps Canada Needs to Take to Defend Itself." Christian Leuprecht is a security expert and a professor at the Royal Military College of Canada and at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Christian, welcome to Bridge City News.
Hello.
The Huawei controversy has created a lot of headlines, but I do wonder if the average Canadian really cares. They think to themselves, just a telecommunications company, what's the big deal? Can you explain how Huawei can pose a real threat to Canada's national security?
So I think this is generally the challenge that we have with anything in cyberspace and with regards to networks, data, cybersecurity in particular, that on the one hand, people have a relatively poor understanding of how that space works. It's a little bit like getting into your car. You don't understand exactly how the engine works. You just get in and it sort of runs. And then there's the Hollywood effect, where the understanding that people think they do have comes from movies that really convey a very adulterated version of how things actually work. And so you put those together, and it becomes very difficult to convey to people how the real world actually works on this particular issue. So let me take a step back and explain why, in particular, the Huawei issue is so controversial. You have to understand the basic structure of the internet, which is sort of a hierarchical structure of switches. And these switches direct essentially traffic and flow of traffic. And so there are only so many high-level switches within the network, and only so many, for instance, in North America. And so the more of the traffic you can see, the more of the traffic you can divert, the more of the traffic you can try to decrypt. And even if the traffic is encrypted, simply seeing the traffic patterns provides a significant amount of intelligence. And so the concern here is that whoever provides equipment for those top-level switches could ostensibly try to manipulate that equipment to their advantage. And so the debate here is on whether a company that is closely linked with a country that in some ways is a partner, in some ways is a collaborator, but in other ways is very much an adversary, as we can see on other policy issues with regards to China, whether we want to give that sort of company unfettered access to the most critical parts of our critical communications infrastructure.
You know, it's very interesting to note as well, Christian, that China does not allow any foreign companies to operate in its own telecommunication infrastructure networks. How do you respond to that?
So this is one of the points that I have long made, that inherently trade, in particular in technology, should have reciprocity. And so why should we let a company compete in Canada where Canadian firms and other international firms cannot compete fairly in the same way on the Chinese market? But add to that the concerns around Huawei's behavior more broadly. So not only does it have a monopoly on the Chinese market, it receives upwards of $10 billion in subsidies a year, which means, of course, that companies that do not receive such subsidies have a harder time competing, because it means these subsidies can go into innovation, they can go into subsidizing some of the products that the company sells. But Huawei, of course, has a 30-year track record of poor competitive behavior, in particular when it comes to intellectual property. And in Canada, we've been recipients and we've suffered the consequence of that. Older viewers may remember a company called Nortel. Nortel Networks was, in the 1970s and 80s, the leading company in the world in providing said switches that I just talked about, a multi-billion-dollar global company. One of the first products that Huawei produced was essentially a Nortel switch that was reproduced down to the pages of the operating manual, instruction manual of that switch. And so it is, in particular in Canada, baffling to me that we would let a company that has built its own intellectual property and its international competitiveness on the backs of a Canadian multi-billion-dollar company that, as a result, effectively imploded and put thousands of people out of work, that we would let that sort of company then subsequently compete in an open and equitable fashion on the Canadian market.
Now, what about the actual cell phones themselves? If our citizens, politicians, and business people are using phones manufactured by a company controlled by China, what kind of risk does this really present?
So let's be clear. One of the reasons why, for instance, the telecommunications companies in Canada are lobbying hard against a ban on Huawei equipment in network infrastructure is that Huawei equipment is very good and it is very cost effective. And so we need to distinguish between different types of equipment. Yes, you run a certain risk with having a Huawei phone, but you run also a certain risk with having a Google Pixel phone that Google will keep track of your data in a way that, for instance, might be more difficult to do if you have a different type of product. And so those are probably manageable risks, but of course, anybody who buys a Huawei phone takes certain risks in that regard. The question is whether in the critical parts of our communications network infrastructure, we should allow equipment by a company that has not only the track record that I've laid out, but also a, shall we say, dubious relationship with Chinese authorities and with the Chinese government. And in Canada, in 2012, we already made the decision to ban certain types of Huawei equipment from critical Canadian government infrastructure. And so the question then is, how vulnerable are we prepared to leave our broader Canadian internet infrastructure to possible exploitation by an adversary, and to what extent do we want to mitigate those particular types of risks by either banning such equipment outright, or like Germany is looking to do, perhaps write procurement provisions in a way that makes it very difficult or impossible for certain companies to compete, such as those that don't operate in democratic systems, such as some of Huawei's competitors.
Now, I understand that intelligence sources say China has been actively mapping and analyzing the electrical grids and oil pipelines of Western nations. Should we be concerned about this?
So this is a standard procedure in the intelligence game, that you want to understand your competitors, your adversaries, where their possible vulnerabilities might lie in the case of a conflict. But certainly I think we should be, it's when you talk about threats, there are always two components. There's capability and there's intent. And so what China is demonstrating by having mapped these critical infrastructure systems is that it has the capability to map those systems. However, it has insisted, in particular Huawei has insisted, that it does not collaborate with Chinese intelligence. Of course, Chinese legislation requires all Chinese companies to collaborate with the government and its intelligence security services if called upon to do so. And so Huawei claims that no Trojan horses have ever been found in its network equipment that it provides. At the same time, of course, all this equipment has backdoors because, like your home computer, you need to update the software in that equipment. And so that means that while there's no intent today, perhaps, to cause vulnerability and exploitation within that critical infrastructure, that this can change overnight, and that these backdoors that are necessary in the equipment allow a hostile government potentially to exercise such intent in a very expeditious manner.
Now, Christian, some people argue banning Huawei would negatively affect trade with China, and welcoming Huawei into Canada would provide more competition and lower prices for consumers. How are you seeing it?
Yeah, sure. There's always costs and benefits to any policy and political decision in this regard. And so it is clear that a ban on Huawei, or perhaps not an outright ban on Huawei equipment network infrastructure, but perhaps certain restrictions, such as the ones we already have in place for government infrastructure, may well drive up costs, means perhaps a slower build out of the 5G network infrastructure. But I think the Canadian government also needs to show some resolution with regards to safeguarding the sovereign democratic decision-making capability of a constitutional rule of law government that is freely and fairly elected, which of course is not the case when it comes to the Chinese regime. And so we've already seen in current policy areas, such as, for instance, the extradition of Ms. Wang Zhu in Vancouver, the Huawei executive who's currently incarcerated or is being held, detained on request of extradition to the United States, that China is using multiple policy levers to try to change the government's minds. So now imagine if, in addition to the policy levers of political and economic levers, the Chinese government could now exploit vulnerabilities in our critical communications infrastructure in order to, for instance, slow internet traffic in Canada, cut off certain internet traffic, deliberately divert internet traffic, introduce malicious code and other vulnerabilities that might have economic and social consequences within Canada into our internet, in addition to the levers that it is already exercising. And so I would say that Canadian sovereignty is not discretionary, and that ultimately security policy is always a question of, it's kind of like buying insurance. How much coverage are you willing to buy, and how much are you willing to pay for that coverage? And my argument is here that this is an insurance coverage that ultimately Canada needs and wants to buy, because it is impossible or very difficult and costly to remove this type of equipment after the fact. And so we want to remove it from our infrastructure. So we need to, these are what's known as downstream constraints. And so we need to make the decision now as to how secure we want to be and what sort of safeguards we want to put in place.
With the theft of intellectual property and technology taking place more and more often, to what degree could this really be impacting the Canadian economy?
So there are repercussions for the potential repercussions for the Canadian economy, of course, in a couple of ways here. One is the ability of an adversary to manipulate Canadian networks and Canadian data or exploit those for hostile purposes. And of course, banning Huawei equipment or restricting it from infrastructure won't take out those vulnerabilities completely, because if you have a poorly built network, for instance, then you're still open to vulnerabilities. So there's many factors at work here. And it also then provides, having these vulnerabilities in your systems, more opportunity to leverage exploitation of commercial trade secrets, commercial espionage, intellectual property. At the same time, of course, it would allow an adversary to perhaps mount hostile attacks on entire sectors of Canadian prosperity and large Canadian companies or critical infrastructure sectors, whether that might be banking or electricity or pipelines or whatnot, as a way to try to change the government's mind. And so I think these are not the sort of vulnerabilities to which we want to expose ourselves if we value Canadian sovereignty and sovereign decision-making.
Christian, we hear reports that China is actually actively planting people into our educational, business, military, and political arenas in order to exert influence from the inside. Is this actually happening?
So this is what's known as the United Front activities. There's a number of things that have been written about, including a recent book with regards to Canada. It is not as widely known in Canada as, for instance, in Australia. China is not particularly shy about these activities. It is a deliberate, strategic effort and a long-term effort by China to obtain strategic trade secrets, political secrets, and to be able to leverage decision and influence making within countries. And so the broader issue of Huawei and Canadian critical communication infrastructure needs to be situated within these broader efforts by the Chinese regime. And these are efforts on which the current regime under Xi Jinping has very much doubled down and has made it quite public that they are fully committed to United Front activities in order to ensure China's competitiveness, both political, economic, as well as defense, intelligence, and security on the world stage. And so it is important for us to be aware that China is playing aggressively in this arena. And so this is why the conversation about Huawei is just one part of a much broader conversation that we ultimately need to have in Canada about what sort of activities are we prepared to tolerate and what sort of vulnerabilities are we prepared to have, and to what extent do we want to safeguard around this type of leverage, exploitation, and potential vulnerabilities within our broader Canadian society and infrastructure.
So Christian, bottom line, what does the Canadian government need to do to bring proper security to our communications networks?
The government ultimately has an opportunity here to show resolve. We've seen efforts in light of current efforts by the Chinese government to change our minds on the Meng Wanzhou case. The government has been slow rolling a decision on Huawei. And I actually think the Canadian government will want to be aggressive here and show that if China thinks they need to play hardball, that we can do so too. Of course, the reason why the Chinese are so concerned about a decision with regards to Huawei is that it poses serious reputational risk to the company as a whole. There's likely other countries that would fall in line with Canada once such a decision were made. And so it closes off significant markets. It means that one of the reputational risks of a crown jewel of Chinese industry is damaged. But it also means that if the company can no longer compete in certain aspects, it will means the company sells less material. That contributes to the slowdown of the Chinese economy, and that then contributes to undermining some of the legitimacy of the Chinese regime. And so I think Canada has an opportunity here to show resolve and to both make a decision on this critical issue, while at the same time signaling very clearly to the current regime in Beijing that it is not open to being extorted in terms of our policy and political decision-making processes.
Christian Leukprecht is a security expert and a professor at the Royal Military College of Canada and at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Ottawa, Ontario.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, be safe, and have a great night.